Welcome to the People Experience Pulse podcast, your gateway to the new frontier of human experiences at work. On the PX Pulse, we're all about elevating experiences, fostering belonging, and building remarkable workplace cultures in a fast evolving world.
All right, I'm back with Vicki for another episode of the Resilient People Leader series. How are you, Vicki?
I am feeling a little more resilient. How about you?
I am too. Yeah. One step at a time.
Yes, absolutely. That's all we can do each day.
Yeah. So this is a heavy topic today. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. It's faith, values, and leadership, building organizations that last. And the thing that we are contemplating today is how great leaders are successful. It's because of the significance of the values they uphold and their consistency with leaning into that with integrity. So I think you've got some great examples of that, leading with personal values while fostering some inclusivity, Vicki.
Yeah, it's really challenging for people, I think, for the most part, and leaders in particular, because they are role models. They're responsible for their teams. They carry a lot of weight. And so they need to anchor themselves in their own values. And I'm not going to say but, and they need to foster that sense of belonging and respect for other opinions. This is not an easy task. I want to throw that out there immediately. But one of the privileges that I've had in the recent past is to be a moderator for an organization called Braver Angels, and they teach skills for bridging differences across political dialogue. So it's a pretty intense task. But one of the things that they always say is the goal of a conversation like that is not to moderate your opinion, but to moderate your rhetoric. So you're still allowed to have strong opinions as a leader. And if you avoid the rhetoric of strong opinions, you can actually have respectful conversations with people who differ from you. And that's been extremely effective. I've used this technique to talk about some really hot button issues. And I think, Jeff, you have had some experience with interfaith dialogue that has been really successful in this way.
Yeah, agreed. And what I love about what you just said before I jump into that is just, being able to think about what you say and maybe even saying less, listening more, saying less, being respectful of the variety of opinions that are going to be within your organization, because they're all brought through different lenses, they're all brought through different lived experiences, and particularly as it relates to our faith traditions and things that we believe that are inherent in us because of the way that we've been raised. And faith is one of those topics that we don't talk about enough in the workplace, because we often talk about bringing your whole self to work, but kind of the separation of church and state. But yet, we spend so much time contemplating our spiritual selves and the way that we believe in the theology of a God that has a relationship with the world and with us, and how we show up fully because of the way in which that God created us. But everyone has a different perception of that. And so mine is of a Christian background. I know you, Vicki, are Jewish, and we're a partnership in our business, and we talk about faith quite a bit. And it's really helpful to be able to do that. And I know lots of larger organizations have associate networking groups or ERGs that are gathering to lean into interfaith discussions and make that psychologically safe within organizations. So I think that's another great example of, it may not be your personal values as the people leader of the organization or the top leader of an organization, but creating those spaces where inclusivity can still be fostered makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think there's a really interesting kind of seed in there of what you're saying, that we don't necessarily have to sacrifice one thing for another. And that's sometimes the feeling that I get from leaders, but even team members and individual contributors, is that in order to, have your belief or your faith or your perspective be respected in the workplace, that other people need to either subscribe to it, or they don't support you. But there is a third option, which is that you stand strong in your own belief and you accept that that is your perspective, and you listen to other perspectives, or you set a boundary maybe and say, well, okay, yeah, there are certain topics that are not safe for me, that are not like, I'm not going to engage in a dialogue with a Holocaust denier. That's not going to happen.
Right.
I'm not going to listen to that person's perspective. But that's a very rare instance. There's a whole lot of other topics that don't necessarily make me feel comfortable, but I can accept that they exist in the world, and they don't have to be a zero-sum game with my own perspective.
That's right.
And I don't
That's
have
right.
to sacrifice the strength of my belief in order to listen to that perspective and maybe even see a seed of agreement in it, or a seed of like, hey, that makes a little bit of sense. I don't agree with 95% of it, but there's 5% in there that makes sense to me. I think we need to put the and in there instead of the but or the or, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. You're always good about putting the and in there. And I think you're right. That is the misconception. Some think that integrating faith and values in leadership means imposing beliefs. It's the reality is creating a culture of ethical, people first leadership. And that's what we're getting into here, is supporting you as people first leaders and making sure that we touch on these topics because they are deeply personal. All these values, and they guide workplace culture and decision making. They guide us. But when we're clear on our values and we create trust and consistency in the way in which we lead, then people will never guess at how you're going to respond in those situations. They'll understand fully what that means if it's your organization or if you're leading the people aspects of your organization. But, avoiding that ideological leadership and just leading by example, not enforcement,
Yes,
that makes a huge difference, and people will always respect that.
it's true. And it's making me think of, like, when I was in the corporate world, there's just a lot of office gossip. I think that's pretty common to a lot of organizations. But I think that consistency you were talking about helps that too, because if there is a strong sense of uh, the values in which not only the company runs upon, but the leader, and they are consistently demonstrating that, it helps quell things like rumors and gossip and things that tend to bubble up because there's not consistency and trust. I don't know if you've seen that in your work, but that was something
Any
I did not miss when
inconsistency,
I left
yeah,
the corporate world.
not at all. Because people, that often happens is, the leaders end up responding to a certain situation that seems inconsistent with the values that they put up on the wall, that they believe in, that they say are part of the organizational values, part of their personal values. And that's a really tough situation to put yourself in, because once people see that, mistrust starts to bleed into the organization, and it's really hard to repair that
So
with your
true.
people. So really
Yeah.
important to remain consistent on that. So let's talk about how to lead with values without imposing them. We've been thinking about some key elements of that. Do you want to kick us off with that, Vicki?
I think you and I are a really good example of that, if I may brag upon us, because we have two different faiths, and we discuss and share openly those differences and lived experiences, but it never feels imposed. I mean, right?
I totally agree. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
So I think
Yeah.
we're a great case study in that. But I think you really need to have a couple things to start. One is clarity, just knowing what your leadership values actually are. So this is a great exercise for leaders if you haven't really sat down to do that. I do an exercise with my coaching clients around this called the core, which is kind of like what's at the core of you that has been with you since you have any memory of being alive. Uh, Also, like what you were saying, Jeff, around consistency, aligning decisions with those values, but still staying open to diverse perspectives and allowing your mind to be changed sometimes. And then sharing your principles through communication, but not just through words alone, but also through your actions, just being consistent in your actions. And in your communication, recognizing that when you share your perspective, it is your perspective, it is not universal. And the average human brain tends to think that their perspective is universal. It's kind of the way we're designed. And so we have to fight that a little bit, but it's a really important fight to have, to say, And I even encourage leaders to use those words, in my perspective, and then fill in your opinion. And it really disarms people, takes them off the defense like immediately. Because how do you argue when someone's just sharing their own feelings or perspective? What do you think?
I completely agree with that. And I think that's a great, in my perspective, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or in my humble opinion.
Or from my experience, I use
Yeah.
that one too. Or I'll say, in my lived experience, or this is what's happened to me, framing it as you're just owning it instead of thinking that everybody has
Yeah.
that same perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting to be open minded to other perspectives too. I've absolutely in my career shifted perspectives on certain beliefs and realized that maybe my original thinking wasn't correct in that instance or maybe at all. And so,
Been there.
yeah, oh my gosh. But it's really good to be open to that and really to explore different perspectives, understand and listen to people that have different faith backgrounds or ways that they approach things, because a lot of it is based on customs and there's always multiple ways that you can approach solutions, in terms of solving problems, whether that's a project or a conflict or anything that's going on in the workplace. So being able to have those well-rounded discussions with people that might approach things differently than you can be a strength if you allow for that to be one.
This is what I loved about working in other countries is that you would see people approach business problems in a completely different way than you ever approached them, but you're like, "Wow, that works better," or "It works differently," or maybe it doesn't work as well, but either way, you're being exposed to these different just approaches to the same business problem. And so that's why I always, say about my traveling experience and cultural experiences, it's like other cultures have made me better because I just have more options for how to approach something. But that can happen right within our own companies, within our own neighborhoods, just by, like you said, being open to the possibility that your perspective is one of many. And again, that doesn't mean abandoning something that you feel strongly about. I mean, there are topics and things that I feel really strongly about, and there's not a whole lot that could sway me from that. And hearing somebody's perspective on that's different doesn't mean I have to abandon my view of it. And I think that's a trap.
That
It's,
is that is a trap. I think it's, yeah, integrating your personal values into your decision making while maintaining that open mindedness. I think it comes from a place of curiosity.
mhm,
And when people feel like they can bring their unique ideas and their diverse opinions and perspectives on how to approach solutions or conflict or whatever you're dealing with organizationally as people kind of problems that you're solutioning, there's a respect that comes with that, that you're giving people space to be able to share that and perhaps in that conflict or that project, that's a better solution in that instance, and that it's not a compromise of your values. It's actually being more inclusive and empowering the people around you to participate in
exactly.
these things.
Love that.
Yeah. So I know, like always, we've been trying to approach some practical frameworks that our listeners can use in their day to day. So you, as a people first leader, we understand that there's lots of different problems thrown at you, and you can listen to this podcast or read books all day long, but sometimes it's just hard to implement. So we're trying to make these as simple as possible. So Vicki, do you want to unveil the framework for today?
And as always, we've got a great little acronym for you. So SEEC, and that stands for self awareness, empathy, and ethical decision making. So self awareness is first defining your own core values. And you've got to do that before you do anything else. And once you've done that, though, you can stand by those. But the first E is for empathy. So we need to stand by our values and respect others' perspectives and belief with a form of empathy for their lens and experience. And the final E is ethical decision making, meaning align your actions with your values and not only with business outcomes. If you align everything to the bottom line, that could easily get you out of alignment with your values. But if you align your actions with your values, the business will grow and the business will thrive. Did I miss anything?
No, I think being able to show integrity through actions and not just words is really key. Be as consistent as possible, walking the talk and follow through on those commitments, and just admit mistakes and course correct with transparency when you feel like maybe you got off course, because we're all human.
Yes.
Just because you've risen into a position of leadership and influence doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes along the way. We all make them. But just make sure that you're always asking yourself what your core values are. And I think that's the key here is, you have to define your personal leadership value statement. So
Absolutely.
what principles guide my decision making? What qualities do I admire in other leaders? And how do I want to be known as a leader? And just define your purpose and align all your values with actions, and then, put a leadership value statement together. I think that's a good thing that you can work on, and just live it and revisit it often and remind people why you're coming to a conversation through that lens, because it's your personal leadership value statement. And nobody's going to ever argue with that. If you get some challenges or, you find yourself in conflict, if you continually revisit that, people will respect that in you.
It's so true. And when I went to coaching school for becoming an executive coach, we had to come up with that. We had to come up with, they called it a life purpose statement. So it's a little bit bigger than just work. It's basically who you are and the impact you have on the world. And that was years ago, and mine still stands, and I still have it on my whiteboard. And to this day, I still try to revisit it as often as possible. And mine was, I am a musical sparkler who lifts people up and brings them together. And so anything that I do, it needs to align with that in some way, or it's just not worth doing for me, or it's not going to be a good fit.
Love that. So I think that's a good next step, practical thing to work on. And just remember that values-driven leadership creates trust and long-term impact. So are your leadership decisions aligned with what you truly believe is a good question to ask yourself today. But as always, we're really glad to have you here, and we're going to continue to create content that we hopefully are creating as helpful content to you as a people first leader.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for another insightful episode of the People Experience Pulse. We hope the words shared in this episode have inspired you as much as they've inspired us. Now the real challenge begins, putting what you've learned into practice. The change you create, no matter how small, could be the spark that ignites an exceptional people experience in your organization and beyond. If you found value in today's conversation, we'd greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Your feedback helps us deliver high-value content and reach more listeners like you. You can find other inspiring episodes and additional resources at our website, thepxpulse.com. Join our community at thepxpulse.com. Thank you again for joining us on the People Experience Pulse. Until next time, remember, the heartbeat of any organization is its people. Let's make every pulse count.